Haider Pasha, Director for Security Strategy for Emerging Markets from Symantec.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Haider Pasha. I'm the Director of Security Strategy for Symantec, and I'll apologize in advance for speaking in English, but the topic that we're going to talk about today requires a little bit more technical depth, so I'd like to spend the next 30 minutes talking to you about threat intelligence and how to build an effective threat intelligence capability. When we think about threat intelligence, from a security perspective, of course, threat intelligence is a critical area of security because it allows us to ingest data externally and internally and make sense of what that data actually means, turning it into valuable, actionable information. However, when we go back for a couple of minutes and think about where we started, I mean, we started probably 15, 20, 30 years ago from an IT landscape where today pretty much every industry, including government, and you saw an excellent example from Microsoft in the previous session, where including government is moving towards digitization. When you think across even non-government sectors like healthcare, manufacturing, pretty much every industry is moving towards digitization. However, even though that has a positive influence, I believe there are some negative influences that we need to counter for as well. I believe you leave behind what I refer to as a digital shadow with every online interaction or transaction that you make, and that digital shadow grows. So whether you're an individual or whether you are a business or whether you're a government entity, anytime you go online, you leave behind a piece of information about yourself. And that piece of information can be shared across multiple areas. So the example I'm showing back here is of somebody who may have a smartphone that has a GPS coordinate. And using that GPS coordinate, generally an application like a smartphone app might want to use that GPS coordinate. But that GPS coordinate can get shared with an advertiser, potentially. It could get shared with a GSM provider. It could get shared with law enforcement. And we don't know where that piece of information continues to stay. It might actually get propagated versus being just stored on your specific smartphone. It can actually be replicated multiple times. And so the challenge we have, first of all, is the data that we believe we keep and we believe is stored just for ourselves might not be the case. Now, I'm talking to you as an individual, but what about organizations? What about yourselves? You have supply chain partners that you share data with on a regular basis. And as you share that data, as that data is traversed from your organization to your partner, it becomes a challenge to maintain control of that specific data. Now, the other thing we've started to realize is our dependence on cyber has started to grow. Everything that you see up on the screen, from hyperconnectivity to smart cities to augmented reality, all of those functionalities have started to increase. However, I also believe that the amount of vulnerabilities or the amount of impact that that has from a security perspective has also started to increase, whereby there's actually an increase as our cyber dependence grows, so does the type of vulnerabilities or types of attacks that exist in the market. To the point where everything that you see up on my screen right now has actually been compromised in the last 18 months. Every industry, every image that you see, from whether it's an airline entertainment system to social media to drones to even something as simple as a baby monitor, all of those have had some sort of vulnerabilities that have been exposed. And that's a challenge, and that's something that we need to realize, that as our dependence on cyber continues to increase, we need to keep security on top of mind as we develop new applications and as we develop new products. Now, you think about why this is the case. Well, for starters, the expanded attack surface has completely transformed. I'm sure a lot of us have been in the industry where we remember the days where we had a firewall that would protect our network with an IPS, probably some form of a VPN to secure it, and a perimeter that we could actually define. Well, in today's environment, that attack surface is totally transformed. Because you think about Internet of Things, you think about people bringing in their own devices, people sharing their data from their personal device that might actually be a critical data on their own personal cloud-based applications. And there's only so much we can restrict. So shadow IT, shadow data becomes a critical challenge for us. At the same time, you think about our environment, our own environment as an organization. Again, whether you're a part of the government, whether you're part of a large organization, or even a small or medium business, we no longer have the concept of just having that simple firewall and IPS anymore. We have to cater for services that we're trying to provide now that our business is moving with digitization, and we have to provide those services with obviously a complex environment and a complex network. And our adversaries are these attack groups, have become a lot more sophisticated as a result of that. And so they realize, the gaps that we can potentially have in our environment, and they use those gaps to attack our environment, not just in one fashion, but in multiple phased types of attacks. We call these advanced persistent threats or targeted attacks. And we're seeing a rise of this, or Symantec sees a rise of this for at least the last couple of years. To the point where And obviously I cover emerging markets, so it's the Middle East, Africa, and a pretty large market in general. But every time I sit with a CIO or a CISO, anyone who deals with obviously their information technology, they usually come back and tell me that we have a lot of data, so we see a lot of data, but we don't see valuable information. We don't see information we can actually use, and that's obviously a key challenge for them. So I proposed a threat intelligence framework. So how do you move from combining all of the relevant types of threat data that you have available into a single platform that you can actually build with? Well, for me, it starts with first building those critical capabilities. And those critical capabilities are built by more often than not, fully understanding what your data classification exercise is. So understanding where your data is, understand where your information is. Until you know what is critical and non-critical, and where critical and non-critical is sitting, you can't ingest further information. It'll just add more data versus giving you more information. So data classification is important. Risk management or understanding and prioritizing your risk is another critical factor. Understand where your sensitive data is, but also understand what your skills and your gap are. And then have an incident response program. So when an event actually occurs, because it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. When that event actually occurs, do you have a process for incident response? Do you have a team, or do you have someone that you can pick up the phone and call and say, yes, we see an attack. We need to take action against this attack. What are the specific processes? What information should I collect? Who should I call? Who are the people in my organization that are responsible for incident response? All those things are obviously critical aspects. Because at the end of the day, what will drive the future of your plan is something called an indicator of compromise. What drives your future is, of threat intelligence is a piece of information that I will give to you based on a certain attack I might see anywhere else in the world. So if I come back to you and say, we noticed a government entity in Brazil has seen a targeted threat, and that targeted threat has these characteristics, or what we call indicators of compromise. What do you do with that data? If I tell you that there's a very sensitive file that is actually a malware or disguised as a malware and can spread throughout your network, and this entity that we just saw, again, in Brazil, is similar to what your entity looks like. What do you do with that data? Can you run it through, take that indicator, and can you run it through some form of a big data analytics search engine to understand what does a file do, what does it attack, who is the adversary, who is the hacker group, what is the type of victim that they're targeting, and then build a protection plan to say, okay, based on this data, I'm going to build this protection mechanism to ensure that we are not victims like the victims in Brazil. You have to have that level of coordination in order for you to build that incident response and understand that data classification exercise. The second step focuses on your people. And now we know that there is a shortage of skills. We talked about it last night. We will, I'm sure, talk about it later today and tomorrow again. We know that there's a shortage. But versus coming to terms with the fact that there's a shortage, we have to build and we have to develop our analysts or our security team. And we do this together. We do this working with local universities, with local institutions. We do this with the vendors that are in the region. We do this in partnership to actually build the right level of skill and capability within the region. And it comes with, firstly, understanding that you obviously need diversity. You need diversity from all forms. For me, I've been in the industry for about 20 years. I spent 3 years in Symantec. I spent 14 years at Cisco before I joined Symantec. And I can tell you, for every security operations center I've seen, the better security operations centers are the ones that have analysts that come from diverse backgrounds. So we have analysts, for example, in the Symantec SOC that actually don't have IT as their background at all. These are psychologists. These are people who come from behavioral sciences. And the reason why it's important is they bring a different perspective on when we see a certain attack. What they actually look at is the behavior of why this individual may have done what they've done, versus specifically looking at the log file and understanding what that data is. And that's a new perspective. So that analyst diversity is important. Career advancement is another piece. You have to show your security team that they have a future in the organization. They have a future, and you do that by building a development plan that works for them. And in some cases, it might be in partnership with other organizations. In some cases, it might be specific for the individual, depending on what they're looking for. And the training, the development of those people is very important. You think about airline pilots. How do airline pilots train? They train in a simulator. How do we train as cyber security professionals today? Majority of the time, we train by attending a class for maybe 5 or 6 days, looking at lots of PowerPoints, and then answering a multiple choice exam. Now, I'm part of this. I've done my fair share of certifications, and I don't mean to seem like it's not valuable. It is in its own place. But until you've done some form of a cyber simulation exercise, where you benchmark your team against a live environment, a live fire environment, then you really don't know how good your security team is, or what their gaps are and how to develop those gaps. And that's why you need organizations who have either an on-premise or even a cloud-based cyber skills academy, where we can build, we can work in partnership with you. Vendors like Symantec obviously have solutions around this. We acquired a company called Blackfin about 2 years ago, where we offer solutions where through the cloud we will actually build platforms for your cybersecurity teams to actually log in and train themselves. We'll create these environments for you. But this is important because the simulation aspect is very critical. And then the third step is obviously the sources. What type of sources will you need in order to establish that you're getting the right level of detail? And the sources are important because it's not just about going to a specific vendor and saying, give me your threat intelligence feed, or give me your security information. You first have to look at your internal sources. Do you have the right level of crowdsourcing? Do you have a clear employee security awareness program? Do your employees know that when they see a phishing email, that they will suspect that it's a phishing email, and then they'll call someone from the security team to actually take action? All of that is important, and that's intelligence. That's what your team will leverage, and that's what your team will build as well. And then you look at, obviously, the network, firewalls, IPS, and so on. The second piece of source of information is obviously the industry. Your own supply chain will have different level of services that they can actually offer to you as well. They're seeing different types of alerts and threats. Why not integrate their threat feeds with your threat feeds to gain more intelligence? There are government organizations there as well. So local law enforcement, typically, CERT, the computer emergency readiness teams or response teams are also very important, and they can actually give their perspective of intelligence as well. And then you look at the actual open and commercial sources that are available. Then you look at those threat feeds or the portals to really understand what's happening. And I believe you need each one of those four in order to have a truly effective threat intelligence program, to have a truly effective threat intelligence capability. And again, the commercial sources are various types as well. Again, you have vendors like Symantec and plenty of others that will offer you threat feeds, where we can give you the right level of detail and the right level of intelligence as well. And there's lots of open source pieces as well. And then finally, we talk about the operationalizing of that intelligence. How do you, once you've done those first three steps, how do you operationalize and actually put it in effect? Well, again, you have to think of security from a cyber kill chain perspective, which is what Lockheed Martin refers to. But it's fairly common sense. You start from understanding your risk, and you focus all the way through to the actual process that a certain attack might take, from reconnaissance all the way up to the point where some piece of information can potentially come out of your environment. So that cyber kill chain understanding is important. And then share the information. Share your threat intelligence and be proactive in terms of what that defense looks like. And then finally, the threat analytics is important as well, because this is where I believe the future of intelligence gathering is going to go. Once you've followed those steps, once you've built your analysts and you've done your critical capabilities, once you've identified the sources, the threat analytics is really a question of using big data and leveraging the big data analytics in order to get the level of detail that you're looking for, in order for you to be more predictive and to be more proactive, and to take the right level of incident response when it's required. And that level of big data comes with you putting together a big data platform and actually leveraging that big data platform in order to get the right level of information. Symantec, as you probably know, it's been in the industry for more than 3 decades. And when we started the Norton antivirus more than 30 years ago, we were probably one of the first companies to build a cyber security operations center, the SOC. And today we have 9 SOC centers with about 3,000 researchers and 3,000 engineers that are consistently working 24/7. And we're collecting this intelligence. We're collecting this data on a regular basis. And the reason why the SOC is important is with all the data that we're seeing, and that we will continue to see, because IoT is giving us almost 1 billion new logs on a regular basis as well. But the reason why the SOC is important is you take that intelligence and you integrate it with a cybersecurity operations center, which is something we've done quite often, and we do this in the region quite a lot as well. Quite recently, we worked on a security operations center for Emirates Airlines. And we've essentially put together a cybersecurity operations center that focuses on intelligence as the core. And using intelligence as the core, we've managed to build out their cybersecurity operations center. And it starts, as I mentioned, by building that capability where you can take in all the feeds and you have a team of analysts that are capable and have been trained and that understand what to make sense of that specific data. You then layer on your threat detection team that focuses on the right level of analytics, focuses on the right level of information, does the right level of partnership with any third-party solutions that are available to actually ingest that data and make sense of what that data is going to look like, and all the way up to giving you a full view of what your security posture looks like, along with what the compliance policies look like. We then layer on the prevention team, which primarily functions as change management and focuses on preventing the specific attack or specific detection that they've seen, and also works with incident response, which, again, their main job is forensics. Gather the data, understand what has happened, as the attack has transpired, what are the specific steps that we need to take to stay compliant. And then finally, we look at security simulation. This is the example I gave earlier about making sure that as you see those attacks, as you're seeing the intelligence, you replicate that specific level of attack in your organization. So you run it, again, as a simulation for security awareness, for example. Or if it's a targeted attack, then have your security team practice, do the cyber drill, and make sure that they're capable of preventing something similar if it happens again. And all of that data gets fed right back into your central intelligence unit, central threat intelligence unit, which is the important piece, and obviously has a firm amount of reporting and quality assurance wrapped around it. So that's the SOC. And that's why I think it's important for us to think about as we start thinking about building our own security operations centers, whether it's a large one or a small one, depending on the size of your organization, it's important for us to think about intelligence as the key foundation or the glue that will put all of these processes and all of these technologies together. And finally, from a Symantec perspective, just to give you a quick update, as we mentioned last night, Symantec recently acquired Blue Code, and it's been an excellent addition to our portfolio. But our portfolio focuses on 4 key areas. Now, for those customers that are looking to move to a private or a public cloud, or for those customers that want to continue staying on-premise, Symantec's strategy is to focus on 4 key pillars. The first pillar talks about threat protection. And threat protection is, in a very basic example, helping you keep the bad things out. So all of the attacks that I talked about in the beginning, those advanced persistent threats or those targeted threats that hacker groups are constantly leveraging in order to gain access into our organization. Our solutions focus on keeping those types of attacks out. It focuses primarily around our ATP technology, our advanced threat protection technology. This leverages our endpoint, our email, as well as our network. And now with the addition of Blue Coat, the proxy technology, all working together so that if we detect an attack coming via email, for example, we can prevent and detect that file and distribute the name of that file across all of the different security solutions, so everyone blocks it at the same time. Or if somebody else, if the file comes through another aspect, such as someone mistakenly downloading the file through a malicious website, that automatically gets blocked at the right control point. So that's around threat protection. The second piece is around information protection, and this primarily leverages around data and your data, understanding where it is, how it's stored, how is it rested, how does it transfer from one point to another, keeping track of that data, as well as making sure that it's secure in terms of encryption, and whether you're moving to the cloud or not, we have the right leverage there in terms of making sure that that data is not leaked or taken away in any sense. The third pillar focuses on the analytics and SOC that I've already talked about. And again, Symantec has been in this business for a number of years, so we understand that. The addition of Blue Coat allows us to have a much stronger incident response capability where we can actually track every packet that transfers through your environment. And when the attack happens, we can store and actually go back and look at forensics data to understand exactly how to take action and replay the attack so that you have a good understanding of what is actually transpired. And the last one talks around management and compliance. So this is just a combination of using our ability to map your environment to understand what you have from an IT perspective using Terrace, and then using a control compliance suite from Symantec that will actually tell you whether you are compliant against the local regulations and local IT policies or standards that you're looking at doing. And not just for yourself, but also your supply chain. So if you have your supply chain, we can actually check to see if they are compliant as well. And then the bottom area at the end of this all is the ability for us to provide this as a service for our clients, as well as obviously leveraging a fairly vast cloud platform that we've actually leveraged in various countries around the world to offer to our customers as part of our service. So I'll stop here, and I'm sure if anybody has questions, I'm going to be back there, and if we have time, we could probably go through some of it right now as well. Thank you very much.